previewing this upcoming official visit weekend. We're going to, the last 3 weekends have been loaded in numbers. I think it was close to 20 the first 2 weekends. I think it was about 15 last weekend. I've been saying all month, this last official visit weekend is going to be smaller in numbers, but your hit rate might be higher. And the reason for that is Georgia is getting a clearer picture of what their recruiting board looks like. Other schools are getting a clearer picture of what their recruiting board is going to look like. Certain guys that were scheduled to be at Georgia for the June 20th official visit weekend have committed to other places, and they're not taking visits anywhere else. And so that official visit list has shrunk down significantly. And I'll say this, it's shrunk down even since we've been on this in terms of a text message that I just had come through. So I'm going to talk about 3 guys that are going to be on campus this weekend. And there might be more players that come on campus. There are people that are working out in the 26 class that have gotten offers this week. They might schedule official visits if things go well with them in Georgia. But my focus is going to be on 3. So 1, running back Jay Lamar. This is a weekend everybody's been waiting on. This is a weekend Jay's been waiting on. This is a weekend that Josh Crawford's been waiting on. This is a weekend that Georgia fans have been waiting on because it hasn't been obvious who Georgia's going to take at running back in this cycle. But Jay Lamar is the name that I've always felt it would be hard-pressed to see him sign anywhere other than Georgia. Now, he's coming off a Miami visit that made it interesting. Things got interesting with Clemson at points during the spring. Well, I think Georgia is still in the driver's seat. No matter what has happened, I think Georgia remains in the driver's seat for Jay Lamar. This is a guy from Colquitt County High School that just kind of fits what Georgia's looking for from in-state running backs. He's always loved Georgia. He's known Josh Crawford since before he was really a football recruit in his own right, just through his older brother's recruitment. I was actually down at a Colquitt County morning practice earlier this year, and Josh Crawford was there, and similar to what I was talking about with Tyreek Green and Travaris Robinson. Sometimes you can just sense it, that there is a bond between player and coach that's a little bit different than you've seen with others. I certainly think that's the case with Jay Lamar and Georgia. I also will say I don't think that this is a recruitment that Georgia can afford to lose at this point, because I don't love where Georgia is with Savion Hyder. I don't really like much at all where Georgia is with Derek Cooper right now. I think Georgia wants to take 2 running backs. Well, those are the only 3 names that Georgia has had on official visits this summer. So I think Georgia's got to lock in Jay Lamar this weekend. If they don't, I'll be honest with you, I don't know 100% what the pivot plan would be. I know there is a chance, and I'm going to say chance because he hasn't confirmed it to me yet, but I've heard that Amari Latimer is a big body wide receiver from Sandy Creek High School in Atlanta. I've mentioned him at times on the show before, and especially on our board over at Dogs 24/7, because he's got some of the best running back film in the state of Georgia. Unbelievable hands out of the backfield, massive running back. Doesn't necessarily have the testing numbers that match up with some of what Georgia typically looks for at running back. And I think that's probably what's held him back a little bit getting recruited by Georgia. But I think that Georgia saw him go take an official visit up to Wisconsin earlier this month. Buzz started to generate around Amari Latimer and Wisconsin. And Georgia said, maybe wait a second. We're not ready. We really hope that you're not going to do that yet, because we still want to have a chance. So not 100% sure about Amari Latimer yet, but I think Georgia's got to find a way to lock down Jay Lamar. He leaves that official visit June 22nd. He commits June 25th. Again, I sort of think of it like the Ekene Egboko situation, where nobody wanted to outright say they think Georgia's going to be the favorite to get him, but then when he leaves the official visit, I think it's going to be pretty clear.
Yeah, I mean, watching what happens with Jay Lamar to me is so big right now, and we've had people on the board. I do those Friday Q&As, and people are asking me, all right, who are the running backs I get in this class? And my prediction was, the last Q&A I did was Jay Lamar, and I said, in a running back we're not talking about right now. And the response was, well, tell us who that is. And I'm saying, we don't know. I think that to get that second running back, it's going to be a guy that we're not talking about, which makes me really intrigued by Lattimore, who you just brought up. I'm with you. I don't really like how things look at this point with Savion Hyder. Derek Cooper, I think he was my very first predicted commit. And, I think had to make a prediction right now, Miami would be who I'm watching there. But yeah, I mean, I think this is a very important recruiting cycle for Josh Crawford after the way his first cycle at Georgia played out. They don't get Ousmane Chroma. If you want to try to get your top running backs, and they're swinging for the fences with some of those guys, but I think at the very least they really, really need Jay Lamar. And then if they have to get creative with who they get for that second back, I think there's enough talented options out there they can do that. And when the class is done, they can feel good about the 2 running backs they wind up getting.
The Dogs 20, the doom and gloom folks over at Dogs 24/7 will accuse me of copium for this one. But having seen both of them in person, if Georgia gets Jay Lamar and they do end up circling around and getting Amari Latimer, that is an awesome running back class. Amari Latimer, I've said it on our board even before I knew that Georgia was considering circling back on him, that Amari Latimer is one of my favorite running backs in the state of Georgia this cycle. I understand the reasons why 230-pound running back that doesn't have great testing numbers, why Georgia might not be going all in on that guy, but the dude just scores touchdowns. Like, that's what he does. He's just an unbelievable player. So again, too early to say on Amari Latimer, but if it ends up being Lamar and Latimer, nothing to worry about at Georgia's running back position.
As the great philosopher Garth Brooks once said, some of God's greatest gifts are unanswered prayers. So that could wind up working.
What I was going to say, Jordan. That's exactly what I was going to say. All right, a couple other players there. I said I was going to only bring up 3, and then I brought up Amari Latimer, so you're getting 4. Wide receiver, Kayvon Conciaro, Houston County, big body wide receiver. Now, what's interesting here is, like, if we're talking traditional wide receiver in the Georgia's recruiting class, Ryan Mosley is probably who you look at, and he's more in the big body mold than some. So Georgia hasn't necessarily felt like it needs to go get a big body wide receiver in the class. But I think that if they just, I talked earlier, if Vance Spafford flips and Terrius Favors isn't receptive and Bubba Frazier isn't receptive, and there's not a clear in-state slot option that they feel great about, maybe they just change their plan and they go try and get someone entirely different altogether. And maybe that's Kayvon Conciaro. He's a, 6'4", 6'5" wide receiver. He's even bigger in body type than Ryan Mosley is. And so it's one that it's interesting to me because I know the dude loves Georgia. He obviously already has a high school teammate, Jordan Smith, committed in Georgia's 2026 recruiting class. He's the only wide receiver. Georgia had originally had Prince Gene was going to be on an official visit this weekend. He committed to Kentucky. Trying to think some other wide receivers. Joel Wyatt is a big body wide receiver from Tennessee. He was going to be on an official visit this weekend. That's not happening anymore. A guy in the past, Keyshawn Schneider Tabito, he was going to be on an official visit to Georgia. That's not going to be happening anymore. But Kayvon Conciaro, Georgia's still bringing it on an official visit. So that should tell you a little bit about how Kayvon feels about waiting to see what Georgia has to say, and that Georgia still wants to bring a guy like that on campus, despite the fact the wide receiver class is filling up a little bit. So that's one that I am very intrigued to see how it plays out coming out of the weekend. And I think it 100% plays in to the Vance Spafford, Terrius Favors, 4th wide receiver, 5 wide receivers. Like, what does that picture look like? We don't know quite yet. But Kayvon Conciaro is a name that I have had in my mock class in the past. It's typically been when I've had 5 receivers in the class. And I feel like right now Georgia's more likely to take 4 than 5. But if Vance flips and those other slots aren't receptive, that 4th could very well be Kayvon Conciaro.
Fascinated to see what happens with the receiver, because there's been a few times with different positions these last few cycles where they load up at a position, and then the following year I'm like, well, they're not going to get that. They're not going to take that many guys after they signed, like when they've gotten a bunch of inside linebackers, and they go and do it again. So maybe for me, I'm putting too much stock in, well, they signed 5 receivers last cycle. They can't possibly do that again. I mean, if the cards fall the right way and it plays out, maybe they do. But I think 4 for me, 4 seems like the safe bet. And then maybe if things fall in a certain direction, they do wind up with 5.
Now, Jordan, stop me if you've heard this before. I'm expecting Valden Sona, defensive lineman from Sweden, currently at a boarding school in Virginia. I'm expecting him on an official visit to Georgia this weekend. I was expecting him on an official visit at the beginning of the month. That turned out to be a camp visit. When we did this show last week, I was expecting him to be on the official visit last weekend. He ended up going, earning a camp offer from Ohio State, taking an official visit to Nebraska with the full intention of him being on an official visit to Georgia this final weekend. Someone brought it to my attention on our board earlier today that there were some Texas people that were saying he might be taking an official visit there. I have checked in on it. I am expecting him at Georgia. The people that I trust are expecting him at Georgia. In fact, when I brought it up to someone, they said that he better the hell not be going to Texas. And that was like a news flash to them. We'll see. Because I've been burned on Bolton Sone enough. I even cheated last week, Jordan, because we did predict a commit and we were only doing it with guys for the upcoming official visit weekend. And he didn't end up coming on that official visit weekend. Yet I still put him on my predict to commit team. So you can rule. I'll let you be the Deloitte clearinghouse on that one and determine whether I, stepped out of line on that. But a big body defensive lineman that Georgia really, really wants. I think it's funny. You mentioned earlier when we were talking about Corey Howard, still some uncertainty on the defensive line. We say that, but they already have Carter Lucky in the class. They already have Seven Cloud in the class, who they firmly believe is the best defensive lineman that they're going to be taking. They're camping Corey Howard later this week. I think that they feel like they are in good enough position to maybe land one of James Johnson, Kendall Guerville, obviously Valdon Sone. So it's not a totally clear picture on the defensive line, but for this was a recruiting class where I was told not the deepest class on the defensive line, especially in the state of Georgia. I don't think that they were expecting to just dominate, hit home runs when it comes to defensive line recruiting in this class. If you're looking at Cloud, Lucky, Corey Howard, Valdon Sone, and one of James Johnson or Kendall Guerville or some variation of that, I think Georgia's going to be feeling pretty good about the defensive line cycle. I'm going to put you on the spot, Jordan. Am I going to have to correct myself on Valdon Sone's official visit for a third time this month? What do you think?
I think he's coming to Athens for this visit. He made Ben Wolk sweat a little bit, but as frustrating as I'm sure that is for the folks following this recruitment, I think you just look at those schools pushing for him and you understand how talented he is. I mean, the Ohio States and Nebraska. I think that, Georgia, getting J.J. Hanna in the last cycle, I think that they see real potential with going international with some of these guys and, another defensive lineman at that. So I can see it being a little frustrating to follow right now, but I'm going to say he's in Athens this weekend. And hate to say it, but I think that was a good pick by you when it comes to where he ultimately winds up.
I want to offer a little bit of grace when it comes to that one too, because I know some people might read like he was going to go to Florida and he had to cancel the Florida visit, and he was going to go to Georgia and he canceled the Georgia visit. And then he ends up at Ohio State camp and goes to Nebraska, and now Georgia and Texas, they both kind of think that he's coming on official visits this weekend. This is a guy who was relatively unknown about 8 months ago. He is from Sweden. He doesn't have exposure to a lot of these on-campus experiences the way that some of these guys do over the course of their recruitments. So I have no issue with it being complicated. It's a time crunch. There's only so many dates for him to be able to do certain things, and he's a guy that hasn't had the chance to be able to do as much or give a real honest look to all these various options. I think that's played into why some of the visits and decisions have been a little bit convoluted throughout the last month or so. So I do just want to, I know that some people that hear this, they say, more trouble than it's worth or whatever. Don't think of it that way. Like, come on. Like, when guys are from Europe and they're going through this process for the first time and they haven't gotten to experience a lot of these things, it's very easy to understand how it might just get handled a little bit differently. And that, he's been back and forth between the United States and Sweden at times. It's not always easy to get the schedule right. So I'll still be monitoring to make sure that he comes on the official visit this weekend, but I do think that he will be there.